What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?
In 1996, in a time of action films and dark dramas, came Wes Craven's teen horror classic Scream, a film about a small town that's being haunted by psycho killers who've maybe seen a few too many horror films.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Scream was unlike any of the other films released that year. Instead of a quote-unquote new, creative, and fresh story, Wes Craven took a well-known, basic, almost boringly unoriginal story and told it in a new and more interesting way. And he did it all through intertextuality.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Intertextuality, as described in Too Many Words by Robert Stamm, is a text is a multidimensional space in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. The text feeds on and is fed into an infinitely permeating intertext, which is seen through ever-shifting grids of interpretation. But basically, intertextuality is a relationship between a text, in this case a film, and another text. And to quote fellow video essayist Evan Pushak, intertextuality is as old as storytelling is. It's how language works. All language reaches back and is informed by how it was used in the past. And if Wes Craven's Scream does anything, it's that. Reach back and inform itself in the language of horror, create a relationship with it, and use it to its advantage. Scream is a movie that is self-aware. It calls out and references the thematic tropes of horror films, specifically the slasher subgenre.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
It makes fun of and mimics the horror film and its elements, plays along the lines of several horror subgenres, and still uses basic human fears as established by psychoanalysis to maintain the film's horrific integrity. The entire film basically relies on the viewer's knowledge of horror movies. There's intertextuality in almost every aspect of Scream. The movie's villain, the protagonist, the small town it's set in, and most notably, the basic plot and structure of the film. Let's take a look at them. The psycho killer. The killer that puts the small town of Woodsboro into a panic is a masked, knife-bearing man. Now, this isn't anything new. In Nightmare on Elm Street, a 1984 Craven film, the villain is a man with knives as fingers. In Halloween, a John Carpenter classic released almost 20 years before Scream, Michael Myers wears a silicone mask as he wreaks deadly havoc on the small, quiet town of Haddonfield. Did I mention he also kills with a knife? But Craven knows that this type of villain is played out, so he skips the subtlety of references in creating his villain, and makes the villain canonically and vocally accept that he is who he is because of horror films. That he is moved to violence by them and has learned to mimic the murder style of the classics.
Sid, don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
Craven uses this meta-intertextuality to create this villain that both sets up viewers' expectations of what his actions will be and motives are, while at the same time defying those expectations. The Virgin Survivor.
That's why she always outsmarted the killer in the big chase scene at the end. Only virgins can do that.
You've seen it a million times before. A young woman who is smart and beautiful, and not to mention virginal, is the target of a psycho villain's attention. But because she's unlike her promiscuous friends, she's able to survive the murders, and instead is a spectator to them. This character is pretty ubiquitous in the horror genre. They follow these rules that help them survive. And these rules of survival are well established and well known and understood among viewers of horror films.
Don't you know the rules? What rules? You don't...
The rules. Craven, in continuing with a style of meta-intertextuality, highlights and points out these rules in the movie as part of the narrative to demonstrate his acknowledgement of them and to prepare the viewer for the rest of the film.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance,
take this scene, for example.
you can never have sex.
In this scene, the character is literally giving a speech about the rules of surviving a horror film within a horror film. This scene is one of many great examples of how Craven utilizes intertextuality and meta-intertextuality within the narrative. He allows his characters to be participants in the disposition of the interlacing texts within the film, so as to have the viewers relate to these characters that seem to have horror movies all figured out.
Turn around. Behind you.
In this way, he uses the relationship he's formed with the horror form, as well as the knowledge the audience has based on their horror intake, and he mocks them. The viewer might think, no, I've seen this so many times in so many other horror movies. I've yelled at the characters so many times, just like this guy.
Behind you, kid! Behind you!
And then the viewer realizes, oh, maybe this character is just as cynical as I am about horror movies. I mean, he's yelling at Jamie Lee Curtis like I've yelled at her before, and he's still about to die. Maybe I should look over my shoulder just in case. By being so meta in establishing setting, character, and plot in a way that follows the traditional horror structures that each of these subgenres typically rely on, he lets the viewer create expectations about what will happen next, only to defy those expectations and surprising and often scaring the viewer. Take the final scene of the movie. Here we have the typical villain exposition scene that spans through many films of all genres. The villain, who is seemingly finally dead, wakes up for one last fight.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
The characters vocalize this and then shut it down immediately.
Not in my movie.
Through intertextuality, Craven crosses the lines of horror film subgenres like slasher films, teen horror movies, and comedic horror. He is hyper-aware of crossing these lines, and he's hyper-aware of intertextuality. And because of this, he not only uses these things as a way to support his story, but he uses it as a way to tell his story. It's this use of intertextuality and this hyper-awareness of it that make up the entire film, and make up sort of a new genre. And it's because of this that in Scream, intertextuality is of vital importance.